Hey everyone, Ethan here. I figured it was finally time to go back to my roots for this video series. My first video on this channel covered the original Pikmin, and now I'm finally covering its sequel, Pikmin 2. This game is the primary reason that gave me the idea and motivated me to start this series of videos. Pikmin as a series has been extremely influential to me, with the second game being one of the most important games ever to me. Even though I did make a video on the first game, you don't need to watch it to understand this video, but I would still recommend watching it first to get some extra context. Plus, the video is less than 10 minutes, which I can't say for any other video on my channel. I even remember the day I got Pikmin 2. It was Halloween 2010, and it was the last time I wanted to go trick-or-treating. Just before I embarked, my grandmother pulled the game out of her purse, giving it to me as a gift. I don't think I've ever been more excited to receive a game in my life. Since then, I've played it more times than I can remember over the years. Talking about the game itself for a minute, you may have noticed that there's actually different versions of the title screen, with there being one for each season. Not only that, but there are a few Easter eggs here, such as being able to change the title to say Nintendo instead of Pikmin, and sometimes seeing and even being able to control either a Bulborb or iridescent flint beetle. God, I love this game so much. Also, before moving on, I want to extend a huge thank you to everyone who watched my video on Mario 3. It has amassed over 450 views, making it the second most viewed video on my channel. A number like 450 a year ago was pretty much out of the question, and now my 2 recent videos have surpassed that. So thank you all so much again. Pikmin 2 is a direct sequel to the original game. The game takes place directly after the first one concludes and introduces lots of new ideas. As a quick refresher, Pikmin is a game series often touted as real-time strategy, where you play as a captain who commands cute little creatures named Pikmin to collect various objects to either aid your cause or to grow their numbers. In this game, Olimar and new character Louie return to the distant planet that almost killed Olimar, this time to collect enough treasures to repay their company's crippling debt. While the basic gameplay is the same, this time around there are new areas to explore, new Pikmin types to find, new enemies to traumatize you, 2 playable captains instead of 1, explorable caves, a revamped challenge mode, a new 2-player mode, and more. I know this sounds directly like an advertisement, but it's kind of staggering how much more and new stuff there is this time around, despite it only being released 3 years after the original. A perfect example of how much bigger this game is in terms of scope is that this game has much more of a story than the first game, with there being a handful of characters instead of just one, with each of them having their own voices, and the plot having some wrinkles instead of being one singular unchanging objective. I'm not trying to knock the first game, by the way. The original game is fantastic. I'm more so just pointing out how Pikmin 2 improves upon it. The story begins by briefly recapping the events of the first game, which also tells you that the canon ending of the first game sees Olimar successfully making it off the distant planet alive, presumably with all 30 ship parts. After catching the player up to speed, we see Olimar landing on his home planet of Hokotate, where he's greeted by his boss, the president of Hokotate Freight, and fellow employee Louie. The president explains that due to a failed transport mission where Louie lost his cargo of golden Pikmin carrots to a ravenous space bunny, the company is now in severe debt and will likely go under even after selling all of their assets, which includes Olimar's precious and recently repaired ship, the SS Dolphin. In what may be a stroke of luck, a bottle cap that Olimar brought back as a souvenir for his son is scanned by the company's ship's AI and is found to be worth a substantial amount of Hokotation Pokos. After the cap is taken, the debt is lowered to a measly 10,000 Pokos. The president jumps at the opportunity that there may be more worthwhile treasure on the planet and immediately sends Olimar and Louie there via their company ship. While it isn't integral to the story, it is worth pointing out that upon arriving to the planet's surface, the ship partially collides with a tree, ejecting Louie and sending him flying and leaving the 2 captains temporarily separated. This implies that somehow landing on this planet safely is cursed. Either way, from here, I'm going to be talking about stuff that happens later and even at the end of the game, which I would argue warrants a spoiler warning. I know that this is a Nintendo game and that the story isn't necessarily deep, but it also isn't super predictable either, and I personally wouldn't want to know what's coming ahead of time. So there are two major story beats that take place that I want to talk about. The first of which being when you accumulate enough Pokos to pay off the debt. It initially seems like a bog standard ending with the ship taking off back to Hokotate, but as Olimar looks back towards the planet from space, saying one last goodbye, he realizes that his co-pilot seat is empty, meaning that Louis was somehow left behind on the planet. Unable to turn around in time before the ship makes a warp jump, he is forced to go back to Hokotate without Louis. Upon arriving, the president congratulates Olimar on repaying the debt, and in pursuit of more profits, attempts to send Olimar and Louis back to the planet. It's here where the president realizes that Louis is missing, so instead he volunteers to go in his place. Going back to the planet, there are two objectives: collect all of the treasures the planet has to offer, and save Louis. Probably in that order if you're the president. You will eventually find Louis at the very bottom of the Dream Den, where he is unconscious atop a mound of treasure. Louis and the treasures are attached to the final boss, the Titan Dweevil, which is quite a formidable final boss, utilizing all four of the game's elemental hazards. Once defeated, Olimar and the president secure the unconscious Louis in the cargo hold and blast off, leaving the planet for real this time. Flying closer to space, Olimar again looks back to see what seems to be the ghosts of the Pikmin that have been lost along the way, a humming seemingly saying goodbye. This isn't technically it, however, because if you perfect every level in challenge mode, you will unlock a hidden cutscene called Louis' Dark Secret, which is a short and sweet scene that shows the truth of Louis' expedition with the golden Pikmin carrots. Instead of losing them to a ravenous space bunny, they were instead eaten by Louis, who then fabricated a story to tell the president to save himself. Pikmin is so strange in the best way possible. While the story isn't too deep or anything, the story that was told has fun characters and is quite intriguing with lots of mysteries being left unsolved. I want to take a bit of time to talk about this game's characters. I know that it seems like a Nintendo game shouldn't have much to say about their characters, who are typically very simplistic, but Pikmins have always been quite unique and different from one another. There's realistically only 4 characters, but those characters also give a little insight to their families, so I'll talk about them when talking about the characters they're related to. The first of which is Olimar. His character was actually fairly defined in the first game, which I never went into detail about, but he's a super caring husband and father of 2, and owner of a dog named Bulby. He cares about the Pikmin's lives, and he doesn't see them as expendable. He's also very interested in the distant planet he lands on, specifically about the wildlife there, giving all of them scientific names and thoroughly analyzing them. From some of the messages that you can receive at the end of each day, you get to hear from his wife, son, and daughter. His wife usually talks about money in one way, shape, or form. She seems to be pretty strict, wanting her kids to grow up to be successful, all the while being less than careful with money, spending it on lottery tickets and going on solo vacations. Both of his children are relatively young, still in grade school. Olimar's son is very interested in going on adventures, hoping that one day his dad will finally take him out into space. His daughter is more focused on becoming a proper lady, although it's not exactly clear if that's something that she wants or a goal that her mother has pushed on her. Next is probably the most intriguing character in Pikmin, that being the mysterious and dastardly Louis. On the surface, Louis just seems like an uninterested employee with a particular interest in food. Underneath though, it seems to be a little more sinister, whether it's on purpose or not. Louis has a huge interest in cooking everything he comes across, to the point of all of his Picklopedia entries being how to properly prepare each creature as a meal. He also has a fascination with bugs, to the point where he requests his coworkers to call him the king of bugs after he's rescued. Speaking of which, it is left ambiguous as to whether he was unintentionally left behind, or he chose to stay behind because he wanted to. Either way, the two things that turn mildly strange interest into something potentially evil is his expedition with the golden Pikmin carrots, and everything surrounding the Titan Dweevil fight. With the golden Pikmin carrot situation, it showcases his seemingly undying hunger, which he prioritizes above seemingly everything else, even if it has consequences on others. The Titan Dweevil situation is even potentially worse, with the Hokotate ship suggesting that it's possible that Louis was somehow controlling the Titan Dweevil during the fight. I'm not sure why, but I've always really liked Louis, even before I knew about his misdeeds. Since then, I really appreciate him as a character, even if he is off-putting. Louis' only known family is his grandmother, who reminisces about her time spent with him, cooking for him and making him eat bugs outside. She's really odd and likely contributes to why Louis is the oddity that he is. The president is up next, who is commonly referred to as Shacho, which is just president in Japanese. He has much less depth than Olimar and Louis, but is still entertaining, being a very boastful and stingy boss. In his letters to the captains, he goes back and forth from threatening and insulting them, to promoting them and promising rewards upon their return. He has a wife who, in her letters, always berates Shacho for not working fast enough, or that she's the real boss of the company and is doing better work in his absence. The final character I want to talk about is the Hokote ship itself. As you could probably derive from its intended function, it's very greedy, being pretty much solely focused on finding treasure. It's very critical of Olimar and Louis, but shows immense respect towards the president. Its only other quirk is that it hates the creatures on the planet, specifically bugs. I've never cared for the ship and have always found it somewhat annoying, but it certainly does have its fans out there. With all of the story related stuff out of the way, I want to talk about the new mechanics and change features Pikmin 2 brings to the table. Some changes are bigger than others, so they'll get their own sections. The first addition, and one of the most apparent, is that there are now 2 playable captains at once. With 2 captains instead of 1, you can split your squad and multitask a bit easier, letting you basically be able to perform 2 tasks that may be across the map at once. It isn't perfect, as you still have to manually make the captains do everything you want them to for the most part, but it's an incredibly welcome change and even opened the door for puzzles that require 2 captains to exist. The only thing they really do themselves is they sometimes run around if an enemy is trying to attack them. Speaking of which, the ship can no longer heal your captain, since it has a different use that I'll go over soon. If either one of them loses all of their health, they will be incapacitated and thus unplayable for the remainder of the day. Also, I love how each captain has their own sounds for whistling, dismissing, and swarming, as well as their color. Olimar has the same sounds as he did in the first game, being a pea whistle and his color being red. Louis' sounds are more akin to a train whistle and uses blue for his color. Lastly, the president's sounds are much more like a car horn, with his color being purple. Lastly, something I'll touch on briefly now is that there are also upgrades that you can get throughout the game that will improve various parts of your function, but I'll talk more about that in the treasure section. A smaller yet quite impactful addition this game made was adding the Ultra Sprays. Ultra Sprays are initially collected through collecting 10 of their berry variants, and then later can be found in eggs. Ultra Spicy Sprays will essentially overclock your squad of Pikmin, making them faster in every way you can think of. They run faster, carry faster, attack faster, and dig faster, regardless of their maturity. Ultra Bitter Spray is the more defensive option. Using it will encase enemies immediately in front of you in stone, allowing you an opening to attack them without danger or giving you the opening to run away. The only potential downside being that killing them will completely destroy their body. This usually isn't an issue, especially since they are very likely to drop nectar or one of the 2 sprays instead. Also, there's a useful glitch that you can perform which nets you 2 sprays instead of 1, by pushing one of your captains into the liquid spray and then walking into it with the other. A looming feature that was integral to the first game was the day system and its 30-day limit. While this game still operates with the day system, there is no longer a limit on how many days you can spend on the planet, with it effectively being infinite. As a kid, I really enjoyed the day limit being removed for this game, as the first game gave me lots of stress trying to complete the game on time. A quality of life feature that was basically new to this game is the ability to more effectively manage your squad, by being able to swap not only which Pikmin types you want to throw, but also what maturity you want to throw to, all with the press of a button, instead of having to disband your squad first. This was technically present in the first game, but only in the Wii and Switch versions, which were released after Pikmin 2. The Pikmin AI was also vastly improved this time around, which is a way bigger deal than it sounds. Pikmin overall are faster than in the first game, not to mention that they're smarter too. When trying to have them carry an object, they grab the object quicker and more easily. Also, they're much less likely to trip, and even if they do, they recover much more quickly. They're also just more responsive in general, responding to your whistles more quickly, and when propagating them, they sprout much sooner and take less time to be pulled out of the ground. Something else that is also really nice is that it's much easier to flowerize Pikmin with nectar, since you're able to swarm more Pikmin on it even after some have already started drinking. One of the biggest and flashiest additions this game has to offer are the new Pikmin types, with this game introducing 3 new types. First though, I want to talk about the returning Pikmin types, those being red, yellow, and blue. Red Pikmin are identical to how they were in the first game, still immune to fire and also retain the 1.5 times attack damage. The small difference comes from how the environment has changed around them. The fire geyser from the first game reprised its role as the main fire hazard in this game, but is now destructible, and since it isn't constantly on, means that it could somewhat easily be destroyed by other Pikmin types. Not to mention that in combat, they're severely outclassed by one of the new Pikmin types that this game introduces. Yellow Pikmin are the only original type to have undergone changes to their core abilities. In the first game, they were able to be thrown higher than the other types, as well as being the only Pikmin type able to carry bomb rocks. Bomb rocks are no longer carryable in this game, instead acting as a hazard, so they lost that function. However, they gained immunity to the new and very dangerous electricity. I'll go into more detail about it later, but electricity is the most dangerous hazard in the game, making yellow stock rise quite a bit compared to reds and blues, especially since there are now electric gates which can only be felled by yellows. Speaking of blue Pikmin though, they actually haven't changed at all. They're still able to enter water without worry and act as lifeguards for the other types. If nothing else, they're the most consistent type. Let's get into the new types though, which I'll cover in the order they appear in. All 3 new Pikmin types are discovered in underground caves, do not have their own onion, and cannot propagate normally. Purple Pikmin are the first new type discovered and are infamous for how useful they are. Appearance-wise, they stand out by the hairs on their head and also being a bit heftier than all the other types. Like their appearance might suggest, they move slower than all the other types, which is made up for by their immense strength. One purple Pikmin has the carry capacity of 10 average Pikmin, making them great transporters. They're also masters of combat, being able to home in on enemies when thrown, do extra damage on impact, have a chance to temporarily stun enemies, and do double damage. Purples are the reason that reds lost most of their utility, since purples do what reds do way better. The next new type is the white Pikmin, which acts as an opposite to purples. Instead of being large and slow, whites are small and swift, have eerie red eyes, and even have a few tricks up their sleeves. Being as nimble as they are allows them to carry objects fast, plus they're able to detect buried treasure and dig them out, which no other Pikmin can do, which is what their red eyes are for. Other Pikmin are able to dig, but only if an object is visible. White Pikmin also come with immunity to the new poison hazard, which sits between fire and electricity in terms of its ferocity. There are poison gates, but don't kill nearly as quickly as electricity would. On top of all that, white Pikmin have a small niche in combat, where if they're eaten by an enemy, they'll poison the enemy, damaging it. White Pikmin have a lot going for them, which I did not appreciate at first. Also, I mentioned that purple and white Pikmin cannot propagate normally. This is because you can only receive them by transforming your Pikmin into them by throwing them into violet and ivory candy pop buds. Since they lack an onion, they are stored in the ship's hull, and if they attempt to carry enemies back to base, they will choose a random onion to bring it to. Lastly, their flowered appearance is slightly unique from the original 3, with the flowers and buds being a pink color instead of white. There is one more Pikmin type in this game which is probably the most unique out of the series, that being the Bulbmin. Bulbmin are juvenile bulborbs that have been infected by the Pikmin parasite. They are only found in caves following their parent. If the parent is killed, they are able to be called by the whistle, adding them to your squad. This is the only way to get them, as they lack both an onion and candy pop buds. Bulbmin are unique in that they're immune to every elemental hazard in the game: fire, electricity, poison, and even water. They however don't outclass any other type, since they're found very scarcely in select caves, and are completely unable to leave those caves, which unfortunately leads to them rather sadly staring up at you and your squad as you leave for the surface. This game seemed to spark the discussion of balancing in the Pikmin series, which has never really been solved even as recently as Pikmin 4. In a way, it's only gotten worse, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The biggest new addition to Pikmin 2 in my opinion is the new explorable caves. Caves completely change how you play Pikmin, by breaking up the time management aspect, cutting you off from your onions, and plunging you into caverns of danger and mystery. Caves are multi-floor underground areas where you're supposed to find all the treasures you can before moving on to the next sublevel. While in the caves, time doesn't move at all, so you can spend as much time as you'd like down there, and upon your return, it will be the exact same time as when you left. You enter caves with the Pikmin that are currently in your squad, which doesn't include any Pikmin that may be with another captain somewhere else. Thankfully, any Pikmin that don't enter the cave but are on the surface will automatically be stored in their respective onion or hull, so no worries there. While in the caves, your only base is the ship's research pod, so anything you bring to it will be converted to Pokos. This means that you aren't able to traditionally grow more Pikmin like usual. However, there are still some ways to get more, albeit they are uncommon. Caves, in addition to housing treasures, house enemies, and are where you find a majority of the game's bosses. Thankfully, you won't have to worry about going in completely unprepared, since the game will warn you about what hazards will be present before entering. Your game will save each time you enter a cave and descend to a lower sublevel, making it convenient to potentially reset if you suffer a big loss. I know I have. Speaking of resetting, most sublevels in a given cave will have a somewhat randomly generated layout. I say somewhat as the enemies and treasures will always be the same, but the locations and layout will be shuffled, which helps promote replayability. Some sublevels are always the same, with those exceptions usually going to the final sublevel of a cave, being the boss's sublevel. You'll know that you're at the end of a cave since the game notifies you when you're on the final sublevel. The amount of sublevels a cave has will always be the same and vary from 2 all the way to 15. The number of sublevels in a cave increases as you progress through the game. Aesthetically speaking, what a sublevel looks like is based on what its theme is. There are 7 total, so each cave doesn't have their own unique look per se, but generally each cave sticks to 1 or 2 themes. There's soil, which is a very basic natural underground look and appears in most caves. Snow, which is pretty self-explanatory and only appears in caves in the Valley of Repose. Metal, which features narrow industrial terrain surrounded by bottomless pits, making it one of the more consistently dangerous themes. There's also concrete, which is more blocky and stony. Garden, which is bright and features lots of plant life. Tiles, which makes everything look like a bathroom and is the main theme of the shower room. And my personal favorite is almost exclusive to the Glutton's Kitchen, being Toy Box, which features wood flooring, toys scattered about, and funky songs. There's 2 ways to leave. The main way is via the geyser, which will always be on the final floor of a cave, but can sometimes be found on various sublevels depending on the cave. The other way is with the give up and leave menu option, which takes you out no matter where you are, but you're unable to keep any of the treasure you collected in that run. You get the same result if both of your captains are knocked out. Caves are an integral part of Pikmin 2, with each area having 3 or 4 caves, totaling 14 total. Caves are sort of a divisive addition among fans. I've always loved them since I found them pausing time stress relieving as a kid, plus their added difficulty can be quite fun. They added quite a bit of variance that I really enjoy. For some, it may be a little disappointing to hear that Pikmin 2 only has 4 areas to explore compared to 5 in the first game. However, in the first game, the impact site and the final trial were not full areas to explore, whereas each of the 4 areas in 2 are fully realized. Each of the areas in this game are supposed to mirror each of the 4 seasons, which I think is awesome. Something that may not be super exciting to hear is that 3 of the 4 areas in this game are essentially remixed areas from the first game, although the way that this game changes them makes them feel unique but familiar. You unlock the areas in a linear order like the first game, although the difficulty of each doesn't necessarily reflect the order you find them in. The first area you land in is the Valley of Repose, which is actually the only level that isn't based on an area from Pikmin 1. This is a snowy winter wonderland split into 2 sections, and is where the tutorial takes place. Although it features more exploration than the impact site from 1, with a handful of treasures and 3 caves. Even though it's the first area you land in, it's probably the second most difficult to complete, mostly due to it having 2 challenging caves and decent enemy density. The second area, the Awakening Wood, is based on the Forest of Hope from the first game and reflects the springtime. Out of the remixed areas, this is probably the most similar to its original incarnation, but it's still different enough to feel fresh. It's definitely the easiest area to fully complete despite having 4 caves, since the caves themselves are relatively tame. This is probably my favorite area in the game, both due to how serene it looks, plus being fun to explore. The third area is the Perplexing Pool, which is remixed from the Distant Spring, and features just a little less water than it, although the area is still very much based around it. In terms of aesthetic, it's probably the most similar to the Distant Spring since both feel very much in line with summer. It's only the second most difficult area overall, although one of its 4 caves is an outlier, being one of the most stressful and difficult caves in the game, which I'll go more into later. This area also features my favorite cave in the game, the Glutton's Kitchen. The final area, the Wistful Wild, is only available in the postgame, and has a really cool idea for its layout. Instead of remixing a single area from the first game, it takes both the impact site and the final trial and connects them, all with an autumn feel. Since it's the last area you find, it's the most difficult by far. There are a ton of enemies around the map and 3 difficult caves to explore. I love pretty much everything about this area, especially the music. Let's get to talking about your main goal for the game, treasures. Treasures can be found both above ground and in caves, and come in a variety of sizes and values. You mostly find them laying about, although there are some that are either buried or ingested by a creature. Lots of them in most versions of the game are product placement items like the iconic Duracell battery or Snapple lid. There are also a few of Nintendo's things in there too. My favorite treasure is probably the rubber ducky, which is unfortunately named the rubber ugly, which simply isn't true. There isn't a minimum amount you need to complete the game as long as you reach 10,000 Pokos, so technically if you really hate yourself, you can just collect enemy corpses, although obviously I would not recommend doing that. In order to 100% the game, you have to collect all 206 treasures, which may sound like a lot, but they add up very quickly, especially with the caves containing most of them. All of them are given their own name to reflect what the ship hypothesizes its use on the planet was, which is a very nice touch of realism. You can view all of the treasures in the Treasure Hoard menu, where you can view them in 3D, and read both Olimar's perspective as well as a sales pitch written by the ship if you complete an individual group of treasures. Something that can be a little annoying, especially on repeat playthroughs, is that the game will play a small cutscene every single time you collect a treasure. It is useful for telling you its name and value, but can get a little overbearing since you have to watch what is essentially the same cinematic 206 times. Thankfully though, it's very short and isn't nearly as bad as it sounds. There is one specific group of treasures I want to highlight since they're not just treasures, but also serve as upgrades. There are 13 total and serve a variety of purposes, but are typically found on the final floor of caves. You have your basic ones like the globes that unlock new areas and the key which unlocks challenge mode. The rest apply as upgrades to your captains, like giving you immunity to fire and electricity and making you more resistant to damage or punch harder. There's also extremely useful ones like the solar system making caves brighter or the pluckaphone which plucks buried Pikmin with your whistle. The arguably most important of all though is the treasure gauge, which is integral to finding every treasure. It sits at the bottom right corner of your screen and beeps loudly at you if you're close to a treasure. It can be a little annoying at times, but it's pretty easy to tune out in my opinion. I feel like upgrades are a great motivator for getting through an entire cave, since you'll usually come out stronger for it. Something that I heavily glossed over in my video about the first game is the enemies and obstacles. Firstly, the world of Pikmin has a huge variety of creatures to find, which are incredibly unique in their own right. Typically, an enemy will try to either eat your Pikmin, crush them, or disrupt you in some way to put your squad in a position to be killed. Enemies are usually aggressive, but there are a handful that are completely docile. Every creature has at least one strategy to beat it without casualty, which the game lets you figure out for yourself, but attacks are commonly telegraphed. Most of the time, the reward for killing an enemy will be their own body, which is used to increase your Pikmin's numbers, although enemies, especially bosses, will somewhat regularly drop pellets or treasures. When attacking a creature, their health will display as a colorful circle. Some enemies specifically have elemental attacks and are meant to be fought with a specific type of Pikmin. The first game did this too, but to a much lesser degree. Almost all elemental enemies can be taken down with any Pikmin type and just recommend a specific type. The only exception is the fiery Bulblax, which itself is on fire, so unless it enters water, red Pikmin are your only choice, which funnily enough is one of red Pikmin's only useful unique traits in this game. Anyway, I've mentioned bosses a few times and are marked by having the boss music when you fight them. As you can probably guess, they have more health and require more strategy to take on, at least for the most part. Bosses are usually only found in the final floor of a cave unless its name is the Burrowing Snagret or you're in the Hole of Heroes. Every single creature in the game, including plants, are cataloged in the Piklopedia. Much like the treasure hoard, the Piklopedia allows you to view every single creature in the game as long as you've interacted with it before. In addition to just looking at its natural habitat, you can also throw pick carrots at it to see its habits, like how it eats or how easily it wakes up. On top of that, you can also see how much the creature is worth in Pokos, how many of those enemies you killed, and how many Pikmin you've lost to them. You still get Olimar's notes this time too, which gives the creatures their own scientific names and gives more insight into their function in their respective ecosystem. And if you 100% the game, you also get to see how Louie would cook and eat every single one of them. Great! By the way, my favorite enemy is probably the giant bread bug, which is a pretty common pick. I just love the sounds he makes when he walks around. Quickly switching topics to the obstacles, this game will obviously try to roadblock you in a few ways. There's walls which your Pikmin can knock down, although some of them are layered in a specific hazard. There's elemental hazards like fire geysers, poison emitters, and electrical wires. Speaking about elemental hazards specifically, much like the first game, coming into contact with hazards will make your Pikmin suffer for a short time before they die. However, in that short time you can save them by whistling them. That is not the case for electricity though. If any Pikmin type other than Yellow or Bulbmin come in contact with electricity, even for a second, they're immediately zapped into oblivion. There are also more tame obstacles like bridges that need to be built, weighted blocks, and clogs which block cave entrances or drain water when broken. When it comes to the difficulty, Pikmin 2 is notorious for sometimes being chaotic and stressful. The first game was and still is relatively challenging, mostly due to having the quirks involving the Pikmin. This game's difficulty instead stems from large enemy density, tough enemies, and falling hazards in caves. The overworld areas are much more tame compared to the caves, and I think the reason for that is because the caves save each sublevel and don't restrict you to a time limit, so you're encouraged to focus more on combat rather than multitasking. The game doesn't just throw you into the deep end thankfully, and has a pretty steady incline of difficulty. It will be a few caves before you start encountering bullbears or Gatling groinks. Speaking of which, something evil that this game did was make those two enemies who are already quite feared enemies even worse with a very specific feature. They're already incredibly lethal due to them being roaming enemies, allowing them to scour the entire area you're in, but they also have the ability to come back from the dead. Once you kill one of them, their health will slowly start to regenerate, and once it reaches full health, it will reanimate, acting as if it never died in the first place. You can circumvent this by taking them back to your ship/onion or by defeating them with the ultra bitter spray. Going back to caves specifically though, another evil act from the developers is that in later caves you'll sometimes be ambushed from things that fall from above. Sometimes this can be something good like an egg with nectar, but most of the time it's a giant boulder, active bomb rock, or even occasionally an enemy. These random drops can be a bit annoying, especially if you like to bring your entire squad everywhere with you. Even considering the randomness though, there are 4 caves that are especially difficult. The Cavern of Chaos, Hole of Heroes, and Dream Den are all difficult for obvious reasons, like tough and plentiful enemies and all that. The Hole of Heroes more so since it's the longest cave in the game and most of its sublevels feature boss fights. All 3 of these caves are appropriately in the Wistful Wild, which isn't exactly much safer on the surface. The outlier is the submerged castle found in the Perplexing Pool. This cave features all hazards but only allows you to enter with blue Pikmin since the entrance is engulfed with water. There are only 5 floors, but 3 of the first 4 floors revolve around a specific hazard. It gets worse since the cave's boss can actually appear on any sublevel you're on if you stick around too long. To make it even worse, the boss cannot be killed until you reach the final sublevel, so if it appears, your only choice is to run and hide. This cave has always stressed me out, but in kind of a good way. It's so unique and not something you'd expect from a Nintendo game. Although I will say that Sublevel 4 took things a bit too far with things falling from the ceiling. Difficulty in this series is not easy to quantify, since it's up to each player to determine how good or bad a day or encounter went. A person who lost 7 Pikmin to a Bulborb may consider that a win, while another person might see that as a catastrophe and want to reset their console. I am more often than not that second person I described. I hate the idea of losing Pikmin at all. It fills me with a genuine sadness when even one of them dies. I suppose it's partially because most of the time, it was my actions that led to Pikmin lives being lost. I know that sounds dramatic when talking about a fake creature in a game, but Pikmin as a game gets me to care about every individual of my squad. These days, most of my playthroughs of any Pikmin game is a no-death run, with me resetting when even a single Pikmin dies. For this playthrough specifically, I decided not to do that to try and get the full experience. I admittedly caved a few times and reset, although most of the time that was due to wanting to be more efficient rather than dealing with heavy losses. I only lost 23 Pikmin, which most of those were to fiery Bulblaxes. 23 is still a pretty small number of deaths in my opinion, and one that I'm generally satisfied with. Somewhere early into the game, you'll find a cave named the Citadel of Spiders. The reward for defeating the boss of this cave is the key. The only function of this treasure is that it unlocks the ability to play challenge mode if you don't have it already. You only need to unlock it once, as long as you have the same overall save regardless if you reset your story save slots. Challenge mode has been significantly overhauled, being only similar to the mode in the first game by name. This time around, there are challenge mode levels that give you a specific number of each type of Pikmin and usually revolve around some sort of theme. You'll always be in a cave and the game will tell you how many sublevels you'll have to traverse before even entering. You won't have any upgrades besides just the knapsack, which allows you to lay down. Everything else, including the treasure gauge, are not given to you. The objective is to find the key and bring it back to the ship pod to either descend to the next sublevel or leave via the geyser on the final floor. You have a set time limit that increases every time you get to a lower sublevel. You can get a higher score by collecting treasures and corpses, completing it quickly, and having minimal or zero Pikmin deaths. There are a total of 30 levels. You start out with 5 unlocked, and more will unlock as you complete the ones available to you for the first time. The overarching goal of challenge mode is to receive a pink flower icon for all 30 levels, which you do by completing every level without losing a single Pikmin. Otherwise, completing a level will only give you a white flower icon. If you do manage to pink flower all 30 levels, you'll unlock a hidden cinematic that gives you more insight into the plot of the game. Also, challenge mode can be played alone or with another person locally. If you do choose to do co-op, player 1 will control Olimar and player 2 will control Louie, and your scores will be separated from single player scores. As a kid, I never really cared for this mode, although I appreciate it much more now, but still very much prefer the main game. Something I admittedly often overlook in this game is the 2-player battle mode. Unlike challenge mode, it's unlocked from minute 1 and pits you against another person locally in a battle to be the best captain. Similar to challenge mode, player 1 plays as Olimar and player 2 is Louie. A key difference lies in the Pikmin, since Olimar only gets reds and Louie only blues. To make things balanced, red Pikmin do not have their attack bonus in this mode, while watery terrain doesn't exist either, essentially making the types equal but distinguishable. The idea is that you're both in an area where the goal is to either be the first to collect 4 yellow marbles, or steal your opponent's singular colored marble. The mode is a balancing act of choosing how many Pikmin to raise, what to choose to bring back to your base, and how to interact with your opponent. There's also a wild card in the collectible cherries, which when collected will spin a roulette wheel that can land on an option that will either help you, such as making you temporarily invisible or automatically sprouting new Pikmin for you, or hinder your opponent by spawning enemies or hazards on them. There are 10 arenas to choose from, all of which are themed after the caves in the main game. Interestingly enough, the arena Hostile Territory features a special feature not seen anywhere else in the entire series. The arena has dormant bomb rocks scattered throughout, and if you attempt to walk into it for a second or so, your captain will pick it up and let you use it however you please. You're able to choose how many Pikmin each player enters with, having a minimum of 5 each and a maximum of 50 each. I've never really cared for this mode much, but it's a really cool addition. I also really like that the Pikmin will chant the captain's name if they're close to winning. Pikmin 2 really raised the bar on how long a Pikmin game could take to play. The first game usually only takes a couple of hours and can easily be beaten in a day or two. The second game is generally around a 20-ish hour experience. Pikmin games as a whole will take you longer if you've never played them before. The game took me about 15 hours to 100%, and then challenge mode took me about 5 hours to 100%. Pikmin is one of those games that makes me feel motivated and encouraged to beat the game more quickly and efficiently. I played Pikmin 2 so many times at this point that I lost count, but it still feels incredible and fun every single time. I would also argue that because there's no day limit and a good majority of the game takes place in caves where time doesn't move, it makes the game less stressful than the first. And because of the caves, it's easy to pick up and play for short durations. In terms of graphics, Pikmin 2 tried for a somewhat realistic take for the environment, which typically doesn't age well as time goes on. In my opinion, for a 20-plus-year-old game, Pikmin 2 looks great, although it obviously doesn't compare to more modern games today. Although the water specifically has aged like wine, looking incredible even by today's standards. By the way, for some reason the promotional materials and renders for this game were made to look like clay art. I'm not sure why they did this, but I don't mind it. I just figured I'd point it out, especially since it might have been jarring to see throughout the video without an explanation. For the music, I actually have to admit that for years I completely overlooked this game's soundtrack, only really liking one or two songs. Over the years, however, I've come to appreciate and even really like most of the tracks. This game does something absolutely incredible with its soundtrack in that it's very dynamic. Every area, whether it's above or below ground, not only has its own track, but the track will add or take away instruments depending on the situation. It'll change if you're carrying an object, near an enemy, battling an enemy, and if you're close to the end of the day if you're above ground. Plus, each area and cave's theme changes slightly depending on if you're playing as Olimar or Louis/the President. Once I found out what Pikmin 2 does with its music, I was absolutely blown away and have held it in a much higher regard since. The songs themselves are usually very tame, serving as ambience, although there are a few that I like in particular. My favorite track is undoubtedly the Giant Breadbugs theme, although the final boss theme is up there too. I also really enjoy two cave themes. They don't have official names, but are commonly referred to as Jelly Float Pool and Mystic Marsh. Lastly, I want to give a specific shout out to the Rest Floor track for helping me fall asleep on a handful of occasions. Pikmin 2 was released in 2004 on the Nintendo GameCube. Its history is actually quite simple, and you shouldn't have millions of decisions to make before even buying the game. The GameCube version can be gotten secondhand for anywhere generally in the $40 to $70 range. This does sound kind of expensive for a game that's as old as it is, but it was around the same price when I got it back in 2010, so at least it's consistent. Pikmin 2, much like its predecessor, was released on the Wii under the New Play Control moniker. It was released in 2012 in the US, even though everywhere else got it only months after Pikmin 1 on the Wii 3 years prior. The additions to this game were very similar to what Pikmin 1 received, being motion controls, upgraded resolution and aspect ratio, and some bug fixes. My main issue with this, much like the Wii version for 1, is the mandatory motion controls. I really wish they allowed you to play with a GameCube controller. Either way, you can get this version of the game secondhand for around $20 to $30. The Wii version was made available digitally on the Wii U Virtual Console in 2016, but is no longer available since the online services were shut down in 2023. Thankfully, one more version of the game exists, that being Pikmin 1 plus 2 on the Nintendo Switch. This was released in 2023 and, as the title states, includes both the first and second game together. This version was built off of the New Play Control versions with a few new tweaks as well. I don't know the extent of it, but both games received bug fixes as well as the ability to allow you to play with the classic controller controls or use gyro for your aiming. One unfortunate but unavoidable consequence of this release was that the product placement for the treasures had to be removed, seemingly due to the license for them expiring. The treasures retain the same name and value but have been retextured to be generic objects. Going along with that, the Pikmin can no longer sing I Know Uda for the same reason. One more slight disappointment is that some of the dialogue has been changed in odd ways. This includes stuff like toning down Olimar's wife, spending Olimar's money, or being strict towards their kids. Also, toning down implied abuse from Louie's grandmother. Both of these are a shame and even a deal breaker in which version to play for some, but I firmly believe that despite 2 disappointments, this is far and away the definitive version to play. You can get it physically in store and digitally on the eShop, both for $59.99. This video in particular is quite special for me. It really made me go back to look at my first video and figure out how I could improve on it. Not only that, but if I haven't made it clear yet, Pikmin 2 is just so special to me that I've been itching to talk about it. With that said, it should be no surprise that Pikmin 2 belongs at number 1, taking the throne from Halo CE. At this point, I'm not sure what else I can say that conveys that I love both this game and series so much. Pikmin is just so important to me, and I wish that more people would play any one of them. Thankfully, the Switch releases of 1 and 2 and Pikmin 4 have both seemed to help quite a bit in that regard. Hopefully that means that by the time I make a video on the 4th game, we won't be waiting for the coveted Pikmin 5. By the way, my next video will be on Pokemon Gold and Silver, meaning that this is your last chance to submit nicknames for any of my team members currently shown on screen. You can do that in the comments of this video or on my Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee video. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to Viper073 aka Lunadium for playing Challenge Mode and Battle Mode with me for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have you played Pikmin 2 before? If so, how do you feel about it compared to the other games in the series? Also, which Pikmin type is your favorite? Mine have and always will be the yellow Pikmin, since I find their ears to be cute and like their electric-centric immunities. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it so I know that you enjoyed it. Even more so, please comment with whatever's on your mind. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again soon.